No, you can't mess me up. I'm going to take my shoes off now to start counting. Jiminy crickets.
That's
All
why
right.
you
Hey, all you
JR.
great. So that's what I'm doing wrong. All right. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So without further ado and interruptions from the peanut gallery, we will let our wonderful guest and longtime fan, Matthew Goodwin, introduce himself.
Okay, hi, and so JR got it right. I'm Matthew A. Goodwin. I am a science fiction author with 6 books out currently, all cyberpunk books, and I came to this podcast as a fan, and they were lucky, or I was lucky enough that they let me on as a guest, so it's real wish fulfillment for me to be here.
Well, thank you. Flattery will get you everywhere. And so normally we'd ask how we first found them, but he just told us he reached out to us. So Matthew, how did you find us?
So I found you when I was setting out to become a sort of indie author. I was trying to consume podcasts as quickly as I could to learn about the craft and just hear what other indie authors had to say. So I found you guys in the previous podcast and I followed you over here. And then with Cisca, I obviously met her at Faulkner Con, where we both came together because of our love of Faulkner. If she doesn't remember, she talked about not liking Faulkner on her introduction episode. See, I am a fan.
He's very long-winded. And the one thing I ever learned is if he wants you to think it's pretty, he uses an L in there.
Yeah, it's funny. Faulkner was one of those authors that actually made me want to write, but I can completely appreciate how he is not for everybody.
Fair enough. That's what we call a throwback there, dear listener. Doc, stop giggling. Put the coffee down. No, you've had too much coffee. Come on, let's get on the show.
Well,
it's one morning podcasts.
Religion question. Why are you throwing me off? I know what the next ones are. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly.
Ooh, so this, I love these religion questions. For me, it was really Star Wars was the thing. My brother was all about Star Trek. It never quite hooked me as a young person, but I wish now that I had loved it because it's so iconic. And but Star Wars for me,
you can start loving it now.
You know, I think I may move into space for my next book series, so it might be time now. I've been rewatching Battlestar Galactica.
Okay, so
Star Wars is the Star Wars was always the thing for me. As a fantasy person and a science fiction person, it sort of is the perfect amalgamation of both because you have sort of fantasy storytelling, but in this laser guns, laser swords world, it still really speaks to me. The first time I went to Batu, at Disneyland, that is really, really cool. Just walking around in Star Wars. So I still love Star Wars to this day.
All right. Since you mentioned Battlestar Galactica, Stargate, or The Expanse?
Oh, okay. So for me, it's BSG. I from the first episode, when they were counting down, that is how you do television. When they were counting down, it drops you in midstream with no preparation. You just get it. They are being hunted by the Cylons. They have been hunted by the Cylons for this long. It was genius storytelling. You can tell in later seasons when they were trying to fill in episodes, and if you listen to some of the director commentaries, they were admittedly trying to fill in episodes because they had these 22 episode seasons and they just did not have the content for it, and you can tell, but it still was just a mastercraft in storytelling.
So JR, okay, so book question, fantasy religion. Are you a Dresden Files, a Lord of the Rings, or Forgotten Realms?
Ooh, that is great. For me, it will always be Tolkien. He was my entry point into all of this. So that, and again, with long-winded authors, apparently I have a theme here already in 10 minutes in. I've always loved it. I was one of those kids that when other kids were reading Harry Potter, I was reading the Silmarillion. Like that was my nerddom. And admittedly, I've never read the Dresden Files, which is, I can't believe I'm admitting that. There was no reason to admit it, but I need to listening to the way people talk about it. I need to get into that next.
I will. I'm sure one of Butcher's fans will come and get me, but I really like the early ones much better than the later ones.
Well, sometimes stories are hard to sustain, you know?
No, I think it's just I liked the cast of characters get so big, and sometimes it's too big for me, and I'm just like, okay. But I think also I may have just not be as into the gritty detective novel anymore as I was. We go through phases as readers. So.
And isn't that the truth? I mean, especially in the last year, I feel like even, you hear a lot of stories about during the course of the pandemic, reader tastes really changed, where in the early days, everybody was obsessed with these pandemic stories. And then at about the 3-4 month mark, everybody just wanted light romance because nobody wanted to think about the real reality of the world anymore.
I will admit, I burned through books at one point, and they were like, the more popcorny they were, the better for me.
That's exactly right. We ended up rewatching Schitt's Creek because we were like, we just want something light.
Well, there was a psychology study done that shows that watching shows or movies or even reading books that you've read before is a comfort. It's a psychological comfort. So
that makes absolute sense.
And because when the world is unpredictable, it's a place where things are predictable and what's going to happen next. I tended towards books with low body counts, I will admit.
Fair enough. Game of Thrones was maybe not your cup of tea.
So no, I did not read Game of Thrones. I didn't read. There were a lot of Middle SF books I didn't read because I didn't want to deal with body counts.
that makes sense.
Yeah, JR is being funny in that. But what was your favorite first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
So for me, and I tell this story in my author bio. For me, I first came to science fiction and fantasy because I found a Hobbit cassette box set in a wooden box in my elementary school library, and I checked it out. It was dramatized, I think recorded in like the 70s. And I started listening to The Hobbit, book on tape, as it were, at the time, and instantly became obsessed. And so that was my entry point. And then at the time, I also found the audio recordings of The Empire Strikes Back. And so then immediately went to Star Wars. So those two properties got their hooks in me, I mean, at a really, really young age. So then by 12, I was starting to, maybe spoiler alert for our next question. By 12, then I wanted to start writing this kind of stuff. And I started with fantasy also. I started with sort of Warhammer Dungeons and Dragons ripoff stuff.
You got to start somewhere. And if you're going to rip something off for your first novel or first short story project at home, those work. Because, if you're going to copy, you might as well try and emulate the best.
I've always agreed with that philosophy. Francis Ford Coppola sort of famously talked about that, where he talks about Sonny's death, and he just lifted that directly from Bonnie and Clyde.
So now what is that what you love about the genre? Like, tell me what you love about this genre of sci-fi fantasy. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think for most, I would think for most people, and for myself certainly also, it's escapism. I've always loved escaping into these other worlds, these fantastical realms. I just, even when it is grim and there's body counts, there's something to be said for just disappearing from the real world into these fantastical worlds. So I think that's, for me, that's always been it, the sort of escapism of it.
So what was your very first memory? You mentioned some of the early books you read, but was that the first time you touched the genre? Was it, cartoons that maybe before that, or because, The Hobbit and The Last Unicorn were cartoons when we were kids? Was it, potentially a video game or whatever?
No, yeah, for me, it really was, those audiobooks really were sort of my entry point. I I think probably Fraggle Rock being sort of fantastical, but
yeah.
I think really it was those Hobbit audiobooks, and then eventually that very weird now Hobbit cartoon movie that I eventually found.
Oh, I remember watching that and being very confused.
Yeah, there's some things that I think as a parent now I would be less inclined to let my kid watch that were totally fine for us to watch as children.
What, Jer?
No, I was just scribbling in the hashtags that I don't know if they help, but we're going to keep doing them. So many authors let their life experiences shape the sort of stories they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments for you that shaped you as a storyteller?
The sort of formative moments for me when I think about becoming a writer is realizing that I connected to literature in a way that maybe not all other kids did. When I was very young, so I think 9 or 10, Jurassic Park was going to come out as a movie. So I got the book Jurassic Park and I started reading Michael Crichton at way too young an age. And the teachers actually had to tell my parents, like, he's reading content that might not be entirely appropriate for kids his age. And so I switched over because it was a classic to Sherlock Holmes, which wasn't much more appropriate, but because it sort of had a cachet, it was okay for a 10-year-old to be reading Sherlock Holmes because it had this name, even though it was literally murder mysteries. But so for me, I realized that I had this connection with storytelling at a very young age, which, so it doesn't surprise me now that by 12 years old, I was trying to write stories and my spelling was appalling. I mean, it hardly is English now to look back, but there are those moments where you sort of realize that your life might have to go a certain direction.
Yeah, I had that same problem where I could read way above what I was probably emotionally ready to hear. I remember reading some pretty dark Stephen King in like the 3rd or 4th grade just to shock the teacher because I knew they probably wouldn't want me to read it. Not that I actually even liked King or liked the story. It was just one of those things where it's like, how can I tweak their noses? Like little boys are wont to do.
So I remember at a dinner table, I read the part where Nedry is gutted by the Dilophosaurus. And I remember still to this day, they talk about him holding his bowels in his hands. And I read that at the table to sort of tweak my parents' noses. That we are right on the same wavelength here.
Yeah. See, my parents took but my mom was that kid, definitely. She tweaked the teachers a lot. My mom, actually, she gave me a lot of those things, but her response when a teacher voiced something similar was, well, we discuss it. And that's the best way for her to become ready to deal with these things. And so my mom, and then I live in the South, and I became a pagan at a very young age, and for in my mom's opinion, because my mom felt like once you were 13, you were old enough to explore your own religious choice, in my mother's viewpoint. And I can understand that. You have the cognitive skills, you're still forming them, but you still have the beginning cognitive skills. And so somebody at my school said something, and my mom went out and got the most outrageous titles, like Witchcraft from the Inside, which was a great historical research book. It talked about art and the pagan iconography that got incorporated into the church without people realizing and why. But yeah, my mom and she's like, I want you to read it and I want you to be holding it up so they can all see the title, so they can all have a problem with it and they can fuck it. And my mother wonders why I have that attitude as an adult.
That's amazing.
My mother is a character on her own right.
So did you also read nonfiction for the fun of it as well when you were younger?
Not as much nonfiction. I like I sort of said, I was much more into the escapism. I'll read some nonfiction now, mostly biographies, but for the most part, I've actually never really connected all that much with nonfiction.
I remember we had the door-to-door encyclopedia salespeople, and we had the Encyclopedia Britannica for kids that I would read. when I outpaced the library's ability to get me new books.
That's called desperate.
But it was
Yeah,
interesting stuff too. Like
you're reading a dictionary essentially. Ugh.
I mean, it's a good way to learn.
Oh, my
For
mom
me,
made
it was much more
me-
Mr. Wizard if I was going to get, like, I loved that kind of stuff. I've always loved learning, but give it to me more in TV and documentaries than in the written word. If it's the written word, it seems to be much more fantasy sci-fi for me.
Yeah, I will admit I consume different themes when I watch TV versus when I'm reading. Like,
yeah, it's a weird divide there.
Different interests. So.
All right. I was going to say it's time for your favorite questions, Doc.
Okay, yay! From transitioning to the fan side of things, because that's what we love too. Have you got any cool fan art or a cosplay of a character yet?
I have. I've received quite a bit of fan art, which is always really, really cool. The only cosplay I've ever had was I commissioned myself. I had a fan favorite character. I decided to write a novella because people really responded well to one of my sort of street samurai badass female characters. So I wrote her backstory, and I reached out to a cosplayer because it just seemed like such a cool thing to actually see this character visually. So on the cover of her novella, I actually have cosplay. I'm hoping in the future we'll get some more cosplay from my world, but I have received fan art. So if you go to my Instagram, you can see some of the fan art I've gotten. One particularly cool one was for, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Gish. It's the greatest international scavenger hunt, and it's hosted by Misha, who was on Supernatural, who played, I can't remember the character's name on Supernatural. Misha Collins, that's his name.
Yeah, Misha was played the Angel.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
sweet guy.
Yeah, so, and all of the money this scavenger hunt raises money for great causes, but somebody actually did fan art of Ina, of this same character, for the greatest international scavenger hunt, and so they tagged me and they tagged Misha, and that was really, really cool for me.
That's super neat.
So speaking of, you might notice this episode. Hold on. This episode is a little bit different because Doc's actually sober because it's only like 11 in the morning. So she's drinking lots of coffee. If she seems a little jittery, she's not dying. Speaking of coffee, this is my blunt force segue transition. Before the show, we were talking about weird coffee drinks, and she gave this most brilliant coffee place. So you have to talk real quick about the coffee ice cubes, and then we're going to talk about a cup.
So I went to, if you're in Atlanta, there's a place called Bagel 101, and they have coffee ice cubes. So the ice cubes are made with coffee, and as you drink your coffee, because this is Georgia, and your ice melts, instead of it becoming watery, it becomes more caffeinated.
That is just such genius.
That is too amazing not to share with the world.
How that isn't everywhere.
Don't know, but I love it.
Yeah, that's so good.
If
and since we're talking about coffee, I will talk about my branded coffee cup that has. So I got 3 corporate logos made for companies in my world, because it's Cyberpunk, so of course the companies are as much characters, the sort of villainistic companies are as much characters as the characters themselves. So I had a couple of those made, and it's really cool because then my wife got it put on a mug for me. So now I can walk around. I've only once had somebody ask what it is, and they did buy a book as a result of me talking about it. So there you go. The branding actually worked.
That is awesome.
All right, I like it. It's pretty neat. And now I want iced coffee because I might actually like it that way.
It is glorious. So has anyone asked you for your autograph out in public, away from a convention or a book signing?
Not. It's only ever really been at book signings.
Okay.
I've had people reach out to me via my website. I guess this counts. People have reached out to me via my website to ask for signed copies that I will ship to people around the world. So certainly in that way, most of my career, I published my first book in July of 2019. So most of my
career has been really
career has been during COVID,
during socially stunted time.
Right. So I haven't had the opportunity to do much. I did one book signing at the launch of my first book, but then pretty much most of the releases of my other books have happened when we can't do things like that. But I have had people reach out to me on my website and want signed copies, and that's always unbelievably flattering.
That's awesome. So they really, really want you in their life.
Right. Yeah. It's really, really sweet.
So
I'm not gonna lie, the first person that sent me one of those letters and asked for an autographed copy, I gave it to him for free because I was just like, oh my God, they wanted an autograph.
I may have done the same thing, and then regretted it when they told me that they were in Ireland.
Yeah, it could have been worse. Australia is bad.
Ooh, yeah, that'll do ya.
So, have you had any spotting of your book in the wild?
So again, the problem with social distancing, I'm not going to be able to see it on the bus so much. Also, while my book is out in paperback, most of my sales, of course, do come from Kindle Unlimited and ebooks. So as a result, it's a little creepy. I mean, I'm not opposed to doing it, but it's a little creepy to be just sort of like, what are you reading over there? Do you happen to be reading into neon?
That is totally understandable. So, especially in an era when we've learned finally to give each other a little bit more personal space.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's really hard at 6 feet to creep on somebody's phone.
Sorry, I'm just picturing somebody going, but. Yeah, no, I understand. So have you had any funny interactions with a fan, which probably would be mostly online these days?
So I was most excited for this question. I assume you guys are familiar with Rule 34.
Yes. Everything that exists on the internet as adult mature content. Rule 34. That
is correct. So one of the first pieces of fan art that I ever got was this same fan favorite character, but without a top on. And this guy sent it to me from sort of Eastern Europe, and he said, please don't share this with anybody, but I wanted to share it with you. Here's my fan art of Ina. And it was interesting. So that was certainly one of the stranger fan interactions. I was super flattered. And look, I will always take more art. It just wasn't at all what I was expecting.
Did you pass that over to your wife then?
Yeah, so of course I certainly have shared this with my wife and with my close friends because it's just one of those things. I mean, it was one of my first pieces of fan art, so it's one of those weird things where it's like, I have to show people with this, but it's also, I'm not allowed to share it publicly, which I really wish I could.
All right, so transitioning back to...
Say what?
Yeah. It says that at least he had good skills with it.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so this is the part of the interview, dear listener, where Matthew A. Goodwin gets to tell us about everything he's written. So can we get the Reader's Digest version of your back catalog?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been writing so far a series called A Cyberpunk Saga. So it is planning, because I am a plotter, so it is planning to be a 7-book series. It already has and will continue to have novellas and side stories. I already discovered that there's going to have to be a lit RPG novel in between books 3 and 4. Book 4 just came out last week. And I also have Neo Cyberpunk, which is an anthology that me and one other author put together with a whole bunch of other really talented cyberpunk indie authors. I think it's really cool to sort of, especially when you're in a smaller genre, to bring people together. So actually last year, I also created and co-founded Cyberpunk Day as just sort of a celebration of everything cyberpunk. So we did 24 hours online of readings, and we had movie directors and video game makers and authors and musicians all just sharing their indie love of cyberpunk. So we'll be doing that again this coming year. Actually, as we speak, one of my partners in Cyberpunk Day is currently sitting out on the streets in San Diego talking to people about Cyberpunk Day.
So when is Cyberpunk Day? Since you brought it up, we have to make sure that we have it.
Absolutely. October 10th is Cyberpunk Day. So we will be celebrating again. If you go to cyberpunkday.com, you can get all of the info there. The cool thing, I wanted cyberpunkday.com to actually be useful to people. So it has a bunch of recommendations for sort of lesser known cyberpunk properties for people who maybe played Cyberpunk 2077 and want more, but don't just want to watch The Matrix.
Oh yeah, no, I one of the things that's really awesome, and you see it with Lit RPG too, is that fandom gets so, because they are they're outnumbered by everybody else, right? They become so passionate and love it, and they support each other really well, and that's beautiful to see.
Right,
So.
and it's cool to be a part of any of those sort of smaller communities. In Cyberpunk, I've really found sort of my people there, which has been an absolute blessing for me. So that's been really, really cool to bring people together through the anthology and then through Cyberpunk Day also. I'll tell this story really quickly and then we can move on to a question. But the reason I came up with the idea is I saw online that there was a National Denim Day. And I thought, man, you know what? If denim gets its own day, I really think I should probably make Cyberpunk Day a thing too. If something as cool as Cyberpunk should really have its own day too. Of course, some people think it's a little against the sort of cyberpunk ethos to do that kind of thing, but that I'll let that be nitpicked on Reddit.
You know what? Have fun with things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. When we get into my book, that's sort of definitely my attitude towards things too.
Now, we here at the Blasters and Blades are big fans of short content, so we've actually started a whole series where we interview authors about short stories, novellas, and novelettes that they do. And because they're short content, they're short interviews, about half an hour, but we'll get with you offline and see if we can't get that anthology, get some of those authors on just to mix up some content.
Absolutely.
Normally, authors reach out.
Maybe around October 10th.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or so while all of that sounds fascinating, we're here to talk today about Into Neon, a cyberpunk saga. So where did you? Oh, you know what? We didn't ask him about the cover. So where did you get the inspiration for this amazing art?
Yeah. So look, if you look at the cover, you'll see that it is reminiscent of other cyberpunk property covers, and that was precisely what I wanted. I wanted a cover that when you look at it, you knew what you were getting. The same thing with the title too. I really wanted, from even just a thumbnail, you could tell what you're getting. So I wanted it to look as cyberpunky as possible, and nothing more cyberpunky than the silhouetted back of a person looking out over a neon city with the rain. A shout out here to Christian Bentalon, who did my cover. He is so talented. I'm going to post sometime soon on the socials all of the terrible drawings that I have done and the versions that he has made of covers.
I love that.
That could be cool.
I like the fact that it's not.
Here's what we'll do.
Grim dark. I like the colors.
And frankly, if I'm being perfectly honest, my cyberpunk novels aren't grimdark either. They certainly are cyberpunk and they have cyberpunk themes, but they are more action adventure, more fun with fun characters than necessarily dark, grim, and gritty cyberpunk that requires a PhD to understand.
I appreciate that. Yep. I like some relaxing, not thought.
Yeah, I mean, mine is more cyberpunk light. It's more, that's why it's a long series. Each book is not a super long book. It's sort of just a tight action adventure. Some people have read it in an afternoon. The audiobook is only 6.5 hours. So it's a nice, good, easy read that delves into dark, difficult questions without being dark and difficult itself.
Fair enough. So do you think that the rain, because you see that on a lot of cyberpunk covers, what is it about the rain that seems to go? Is it because it's got a noir feel to it, or what is it about the rain?
That is part of it. I think, with Blade Runner being sort of the first movie that set the tone for what cyberpunk looks like, and it's literally always night and always raining in the first Blade Runner movie. That's why I think that aesthetic has sort of continued on forever. Like, I don't remember the rain being as much a character in Neuromancer, for example, but in certainly for movies, that seems to be the case, and it has carried on now into the literature.
Fair enough. So speaking of the literature, how did you come up with the premise for Into the Neon? Was it you fried a hard drive and the smoke got to your brain, psychedelics, a Ouija board? What was it?
So for me, I was actually writing a fantasy series. I had written a book and a half in fantasy, and the second book, I wrote 3/4 of the second book during NaNoWriMo, so during National Novel Writing Month, and I needed a break. I needed a break from fantasy, so I was going to write something that was just for myself. Now, cyberpunk is a subgenre that I have just always loved and connected to. From the first time I read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep and then on to Neuromancer, I just have always loved it. I mean, if you could see this bookshelf over my shoulder, it is, I'll have to post a picture. It is just chock full of cyberpunk. So as a result, I thought, you know what, I'd love to try my hands at writing some cyberpunk. So Into Neon was created, honestly, as a break, a little bit of a break from fantasy to delve into something that I was super passionate about. And as a result, it ended up getting its hooks in me in a way that I just wanted to keep writing these characters and keep writing in this world. And it started to balloon into this much larger story that is now a cyberpunk saga.
Fair enough. And so how about this? You take those pictures that you were talking about, including the cover scribbles to what the artist did, and share it in your newsletter next month. And then anybody that wants to see it goes signs up for your newsletter, and all those contacts will be in the show notes. And then they can see this amazing art you didn't have.
Oh man, you are better than I am. I need to get so much better at the newsletter stuff. That is exactly what I will do. I will include all of those things in my next newsletter, which I need to write a new newsletter anyway, because as I mentioned briefly, book 4 just came out, as well as the audiobook for Into Neon. So anybody who is interested in my book after we just talked about it can now find it in audio form. I recommend Chirp rather than Audible because it is cheaper on Chirp, because Amazon, bless you, because Amazon sets their own prices and other things let the authors set their prices. So if you go to Chirp or something, you can get it a little less expensive.
And Chirp has a usable app too. I actually have a decent amount of books over there on Chirp. And Cisca, in her crusade against Bezos, likes anything that's not Amazon.
Yeah, so, as a cyberpunk author, I felt the need. You can get Into Neon from the library. You can get Into Neon pretty much anywhere where they sell audiobooks, because I took a pay cut on Amazon to make sure that I could have my book everywhere that books are sold. Because it's hard as a cyberpunk author to just go exclusive with the evil mega corporation on Earth, you know?
Yeah.
I totally get that. So can you give us the 30-second elevator speech for your book?
Absolutely. My favorite, rather than me just sort of reading the back cover or anything, my favorite summary of Into Neon actually comes from a reviewer who said, Star Wars meets Blade Runner in an epic adventure. And I would be hard pressed to describe it better than that. You know, it's got the Blade Runner setting, but it has a very hero's journey skeleton. So that really summarizes it pretty well. Plus, if you're in an elevator, you know, theoretically you're trying to pitch to Hollywood, so they always love it when you use 2 existing properties, right? This meets that. So Star Wars meets Blade Runner in an exciting adventure is perfect, I think.
I think that sounds great. And
well, so you use elevator pitches though more than just that, because our thinking was when we did it, because we put a lot of thought into fandom, because Doc sort of makes us, or she beats us up and it gets really bloody, is, you know, you go to cons too and people are like, oh, what did you write? And, you know, elevator rides are short, so the question is sort of narrow it down to sell to new readers.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually just got a booth at my first con, so I probably should practice this elevator pitch. I'm also going to be ordering some magnets.
Yeah, it really does help.
So what's this con?
What con?
Silicon San Jose, which is being put on by Adam Savage, who did Mythbusters. So it's in San Jose. William Shatner, Lou Ferrigno are going to be there. I mean, among a million other people like Andy Weir for the authors. And so it seems like it's going to be a cool convention. So I just signed up yesterday to get a booth.
Nice. I wish you luck. It'll be a lot of fun. But yeah,
I mean, it'll hopefully be. I've been to cons as a fan, but I haven't been. It's weird. This whole episode feels like the theme is transitioning from fan to professional in some way.
Well, that's awesome though. But you're doing that, and you're doing it well because you're not looking at us and going, "But it's cyberpunk." That is the description.
Yeah, right.
I had somebody who did that to me at a small convention, and I looked at him and I went, "Well, what's your book about?" Well, it's steampunk. Okay, but I assume there's a plot.
You're right. A genre is actually not a description.
Yeah.
People don't read it necessarily exclusively for the genre, and if they do, you're going to get only a very few readers. Like, I would hope that people outside of cyberpunk fans would enjoy Into Neon.
It sounds like a great book, and I'm definitely buying it and going to be
one sale.
So, what is it that makes, other than the massive availability, and going beyond the obvious corporate overlord, what makes your series really stand out?
For me, it's the characters. I mean, a lot of people will love to say that, but I really have fallen in love with the characters. But several fans who've reached out to me will tell me about the characters that they really connected to, and I have suggestions for more stories that I want to tell in that world. I mean, that's sort of how the novella came to be, was that somebody, a lot of people connected to the one character. So I wanted to expand that. I have one of the main characters who isn't the main character is non-binary, and I do get a lot of people reaching out to me about that character and how they would like to see more of them in future work. So I do have a plan to tell their backstory as well. So, it's just, I really like good characters who speak to each other like human beings. I think a lot of times people are writing characters who are speaking to forward the plot exclusively. Now, of course, dialogue is going to forward the plot, but I think there are ways that you can have people sound like people. And a lot of the reviews will mention that, and I think that that's something that I'm particularly proud of is the characters in this world.
I think the characters for me often drive it more than even the world setting, because I only get fascinated by the world for so long before I'm like, okay, but are the characters cool?
Well, nobody's going to stick with reading just because the world is cool. I mean, the reason that people
read the Silmarillion.
Well played. For the most part, people want good characters. I mean, you think about something like Game of Thrones, where the reason that people were willing to give something that was as violent and gory and not necessarily to the taste of all of these people who became attracted to Game of Thrones, it was because that you started caring about these people and you wanted them not to be tortured.
Yeah.
Joke's on you, because he tortured him anyway.
Joke's on you. That's like, hey, the guaranteed way to get your favorite character to die is to like them.
Yeah, well, especially with Martin, yeah.
That man, whew, murderous.
Although I've certainly killed off a couple of characters that people like.
Well, sometimes you got to do that, but as long as you're doing it precisely, that's like a precision tool, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely, and it serves a purpose. It always works as motivation for the characters, right?
Yes. So which tropes do you feel that Into Neon a cyberpunk saga, what do you feel it hits best?
For the first book, I have a lot of the cyberpunk tropes in the first book. As my world grew and continues, of course, I do more of my spins on everything, but there are evil megacorporations, there are the punk heroes who are fighting the system, there's hackers, there's AI worlds, There's cybernetics. I should pause on cybernetics because, Cyberpunk always has cybernetics. If you don't have a robot arm, are you even really cyberpunk? But I wanted these things to exist organically. I wanted there to be a reason for these things to happen. So for me, I actually was watching a Vice documentary about a particular large book-selling company, and they were talking about robotics taking over human jobs. And this one guy being interviewed said, the one reason that robots can't take over our jobs entirely is because we have a human mind. And so in that moment, I thought, and there's the reason for cybernetics, because you have a human mind with the ability to compete for jobs with robots.
Yeah. So that will be very interesting, particularly because they are moving forward with putting chips in people's brains to help fight Alzheimer's and stuff.
Absolutely. And don't you worry, there are chips in people's brains and into Neon also.
Anything that involves brains, really, like brain surgery, really makes me anxious. So what?
Oh, did you hold on, Doc, hold on. So did you follow then the development by Elon Musk with the brain pig mesh thing that he was doing, where you could control the motor functions of the pig through computers because he put the mesh in its head?
Literally, my fourth book is called Mindhack, the one that just came out, and it might deal with the realities of having a chip in your brain and what kind of ramifications that would have.
Another author that did that that we've had on the show, Terry Mixon, had that happen. He had a whole societal breakdown that basically sent everyone to the Stone Age because they put all kinds of computers in their bodies, and then they got essentially a virus that destroyed humanity.
And that's the kind of thing. I love those kinds of stories and those kinds of questions. Into Neon, one sort of small moment that doesn't have much of a bearing on anything in particular is the main character has this chip in his head, and it's hacked, but not for the purposes of taking over his mind. It's hacked for the purposes of selling him on something, and it's just called a hack ad. And so the idea that you would put these chips in your head and then you would get advertising fed directly into your brain was nice and terrifying for me.
Yes, no, I think one of the things that sometimes we miss about sci-fi, particularly over fantasy, is that you can almost explore some of these medical ethics questions without actually having to endanger human beings and their medical rights.
Yeah, I think that's great, and that's, I think, one of the fun things about cyberpunk in general is just because it's always sort of near future Black Mirror level technology. Yeah. It's a great way to ask questions about, we're just moving forward. What is the Ian Malcolm line? We were so concerned with whether we could that we didn't stop to think whether we should.
Yeah. Another one I love is the slippery slope question, because I'm like, no, this is a slippery slope. They're like, no, it's not. And I'm like, really? Go read this novel. You'll see the slippery slope.
Right. Yeah. Just imagine getting a pop-up in your vision.
So yeah, I can just see where that would be a safety question in some ways too. But getting on to back to our regular scheduled questions.
Right. We're just having too much fun here.
I know, it's a lot of fun. This is a great genre, and you're a wonderful, entertaining guest. What do you think? Can cyberpunk work in a fantasy setting, you think?
Okay, well, first, thank you. That was very nice. And then second, yes. So Shadowrun is, I think, a pretty famous role-playing game, and it's literally that. It's elves and orcs in cyberpunk, basically just neuromancer future.
Okay, yeah. I'm familiar with Shadowrun, but I never really made the connection to it.
Yeah, so it has, it has hackers and all that stuff, but it also, the hackers are dwarves, and so I think you can totally blend those kinds of things. I'm also not one of those people that is really hard and fast on, is it X or is it Y? I much prefer the Venn diagram approach. I think that a thing can be two things. So I think that if you want to write like your fantasy novel with hackers, do it. That's great. I think it should exist. Marketing such a thing might be a little bit more difficult, but they say right to market, so that might be a little harder, but I think it can totally exist.
So
All
since
right,
you
so now
mentioned
on
things
to
can be
the-
more than one thing. What?
Nope, go ahead. You're ad-libbing. Go for it.
You started talking. I was going to ask him what other subgenres he'd put into Neon in.
I don't know that I would categorize it. It is pretty firmly in cyberpunk, but also, it is a hero's journey, I guess, is really the other one. So my fantasy, I made maybe the biggest blunder ever. So those fantasy books that I talked about writing during Nano, I was writing a murder mystery noir in fantasy, and then I decided to go over to cyberpunk, and rather than writing, the more common thing of the murder mystery noir, I decided this is where I'll do the hero's journey. So I did it a bit backwards, but I think that that's sort of the other category that it would fall under. Into Neon does take place in a sort of larger science fiction world, so I do plan to open it up and go off onto other planets. But cyberpunk fans tend not to love aliens and other planets and that kind of stuff, except sort of cursory mentions of it. So I have stayed away from that. You'll hear off-world colonies, and in like Altered Carbon, for example, they do have a real connection to outer space, but I've sort of stayed away from that a little bit.
Okay.
All right, so now we'll move on to the story itself. So what can you tell us about your main character? What makes him or her unique in the crowded field of science fiction?
So Moss is unique in that he really starts as the everyman cog in the evil megacorporation. He doesn't really think much about his life. I sort of structured it as he starts in his Hex, which is his corporate-owned apartment, which he pretty much has never left in his entire life because he works for this company and he works remotely, where he uses the chip in his head to control a robot out in the dangerous wasteland. So he works from home, his home being literally his work, and has never left. And then through a series of hopefully exciting situations, he does end up having to leave into the larger world of BA City outside the comfort of his home. I think he's a good character because one of the things that I really liked, and I get accused of him growing up almost too fast, but one of the things that I liked about him was that he has really good instincts. So it's not that he's some chosen one, it's that when put in a difficult time, he rises to the occasion well, which I think is kind of cool and interesting for a character. Looking back now, I might have added a montage because people seem to really like the montage. Like, he grows up too fast, but if you had that, one paragraph like he spent a month training, then it would be okay. But I really like the idea of a character with just really good instincts, and I do explore that as the books progress, why he has those instincts and how they came to be.
Okay. I like that because the character kind of unfolds with you.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's what hopefully keeps the books interesting. If you have a character who is going to be this unfolding hero, you want them to be tried and you want them to experience life and those difficulties. And certainly, having a robust chip in your mind is also going to be problematic.
Yes.
So, were there any secondary characters that you found especially memorable? Because sometimes they can take on life of their own as well. You did mention that one of them got a novella or novelette. So,
right. So, Ina, YNNA, ended up being the sort of breakout character after the first and second books. So I took a pause after writing the second book to write her novella. It's like 30,000 words and sort of tells her backstory. So she was certainly one, but I really have connected to most of the characters. I I've wanted to write characters that I like, that I would want to be friends with. If you're going to try to fight the system and take down an evil megacorporation, you're not going to want to work with a bunch of dicks. You're going to want to work with people who you work well with. I mentioned to you guys, but I haven't said it here yet. I was a zookeeper before taking on this role. And, when you're in a situation that is potentially dangerous or difficult, you guys know this better than anybody, you want to be with people that you trust and have your back and work well with. So I wanted characters who felt like they would organically be friends and work well together. That's not to say that there isn't conflict. Of course there's conflict and not everybody gets along all the time, but on a fundamental level they get along and they're interesting people. Or at least I hope anyway.
Okay. So speaking of interesting people, does your character have any bad guys that they have to confront, obviously without giving us any spoilers?
Yeah, so because it's Cyberpunk, there are character bad guys as well, but the real bad guys are these few evil megacorporations themselves. So it is hard to get into it without spoiling too much, but it's on the back matter, so I think I can spoil that. The main character works for a company in the beginning that he discovers is maybe not what he thought it was. And so they become the Fudoko from the aforementioned mug, become the evil or become the bad guy. This evil megacorporation. Now there are several other. There's the Carcer Corporation, which in this future there aren't government police. People can hire private police to arrest people basically just on a bounty system. So I took the rich control the world to the nth degree here, where they literally can just pay for police protection, or if somebody's walking their dog down the street and they don't like the way their dog barked at them, if they're rich enough, they could hire the Carcer Corporation to arrest these people. So evil megacorporations really become the bad guys of my world.
That's concerning. Okay. All right, Doc.
So if your characters met you in a back alley, how do you think you'd fare? How do you see that playing out if they knew who you were?
Probably not great for me. I've put them all through some really, really bad stuff. Killing loved ones, prison, all sorts. They would not be thanking me, I don't think. I mean, it's lighter fare, but it's still not light. This is, You
don't think you'd survive to make book 7?
No, I definitely would not.
Well, yeah, lots of authors say that. I feel bad for their characters. So, do you have a favorite character archetype?
Oh, that is a great question. It's funny because, of course, because of the nature of the things that I read, the chosen one does come up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little hackneyed and done to death, but it also is hackneyed and done to death for a reason. It just works. For my own books, I sort of picked a more video game approach to the archetypes, where you sort of have the character classes that are needed to succeed on missions. And so I sort of had people filling those gaps. Like, I definitely need a hacker for the stories. You need somebody who's going to fix the futuristic tech. And then you need somebody who's going to sort of rally the troops, so to speak. So that was the way I sort of formatted it for myself.
That makes sense.
Okay. So finally, what can you tell us about the larger universe and miniseries? The worlds where the story is told is as much a character as the protagonist or antagonist. It seems like that's especially true in Cyberpunk. So can you give us a hint of what we can expect from this world?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, the character does start as a cog in the machine who lives at work. That is, in this future, that is pretty prevalent for a lot of people to live at work. But then he does leave and goes to the the mega city, which is this walled-in sprawl that has become the neon and hologram ads everywhere, the things that you expect from a cyberpunk world, where a lot of people are smoking and there are flying cars. And I guess the main thing that you'll see a lot in Cyberpunk, and is true in my world as well, is a lot of disparity between the wealthy and the not wealthy. There are a lot of poor people and very few wealthy people who live literally above them with their flying cars. So I actually really think that the world is one of the characters. I would love one day to do like a tabletop role-playing game that takes place in the world. I think that while it started with a lot of tropes, I've hopefully turned it into something really cool and alive, and something that makes sense and that people want to engage with.
Okay, so there are currently 7 books out, or 7 books planned in this universe, and you've got some side stories. But what do you think is next after you finish that arc that you've already plotted? Where do you see this going?
So I do see it, as I said, I think I see it going to the stars. So again, because the world is mostly controlled by corporations, I think it'll be interesting to do maybe sort of the military sci-fi space opera, but with a more corporate controlled space rather than its countries or altruistic nations working together. That space is controlled by companies. The Outer Worlds video game, I think, did a little bit of that. And I'm sure there's a bunch of books that have tackled similar themes that I just haven't found yet. But I think that would be something fun to do. What if companies are the ones who are making first contact? And how does that look? And what kind of ramifications does that have for society as a whole versus, nations who have to answer to hopefully their citizenry? So I think there's some cool, meaty material. So I have started the outline for some books that are going to take place out there. Book 5 in a Cyberpunk saga comes out at the end of next month. And so the series might wrap up this year. And if that's the case, then we might see, end of the year, we might see the book in a new science fiction world. But I'll probably stick with a connected world for now. I like that idea. I like the idea of, while they don't necessarily depend on one another, I like the idea that if you want to flesh out the world a bit, here's 8 more books that you can read that take place in the same universe.
Okay. Are you ever going to go back and finish that NaNoWriMo fantasy novel?
I went back and read these first 2 fantasy books. I would probably just have to do a total teardown. They don't read as they have not aged well even in 4 years. They are not so great anymore. So I would love to write that series. And what's worse is I even actually reference the first fantasy book that I wrote that I don't plan to publish. I reference it in Into Neon. And so now it's just this archaic reference to this thing that doesn't exist.
That's funny.
But the reason Thudoko got its name is because my fantasy world takes place in the Thutan Empire. So I wanted this connective tissue. So I made it so that the creator of Thudoko loved my original book. But now, of course, I look back on it and don't think I can ever publish it. So I may have painted myself right into a corner.
Fair enough. So we know that every literary universe, at least the good ones, have internally consistent rules of science, technology, and or magic. So what sort of tech could we expect from these books besides the obvious flying cars you mentioned?
Yeah, so I got flying cars. I do have cybernetics. So people replace body parts with machine parts. We have what I called our relief aids, which are sort of the only humanoid androids, and they serve the purpose that you might expect with the name relief aid. And then I have drudges, which are much more the humanoid robots that look like robots. They are the employees who work out in the wasteland where the people can't live. So basically, in my world, the entire planet that isn't in these megacities has become farmland that feeds these megacities and the off-world colonies. So basically the entire planet was clear-cut, but in order to clear-cut it, a disease happened that made it impossible for people to live out there. So it's a pretty grim future where people can't go out into the wild. They can only exist in these cities, and the robots go out there. But I have most of the technology you would expect in a cyberpunk thing, but I do try to ground it in a reality. I want it to feel like something that doesn't feel too fantastical, that doesn't feel like it couldn't exist or shouldn't exist for any reason. Flying cars are sort of the closest thing to true sci-fi stuff that I delve into. Well, that and off-world colonies, I guess.
So, of all the tech you have in your book, which one would you want to have for daily use?
Ooh, boy. Yeah, a lot of these things sound quite convenient. I would love a flying car. That would be amazing. The robotic parts seems a little weird. Anything in my body, I mean, if it's serving a purpose, if it's a real prosthesis, that's one thing. In the cyberpunk futures, it's often for vanity or for reasons that it shouldn't need to exist. So anything that could be hacked in your body, I would be a little weary of. On the other hand, playing a video game by closing your eyes and experiencing it also sounds cool until you get the pop-up in your brain.
Yeah, the pop-up advertising would be a little bit much for me.
Right.
But how would you abuse it? Would you just go, I'm taking a nap, and then go play your video game?
I mean, maybe. There are times that I think when your kid is really, really acting up and just sort of not doing anything or not helping you in any way, that it wouldn't be bad to just be able to blink into a fantasy world for a few seconds and blink back and say, oh, you know what, kiddo? You're right. Life is good.
As a parent, I have been known to look at my child and say, I can't handle you right now. You're in timeout in your room. I need 30 minutes to go read and calm down.
Right. So, and I'm making this joke. Let's be real. People use their phones as exactly what I'm describing.
Yes.
I mean, go to any playground and
subtle if you're like, I'm counting to 10 quietly.
Right.
It's a little bit more subtle because you could be counting to 10 quietly. So
it's really true. Yeah, the thing I was about to say was that if you go to any playground, most of the parents are escaping into another world on their phone, be it Facebook or whatever. They are escaping.
There are only so many times I can watch my child slide down a slide as much as I love
Exactly right.
And once I hit 30, I've definitely exceeded my limit in a row.
Right. Since we were talking about the technology, one of the things in my world, because I saw everybody holding their phones, I just skipped ahead and eliminated the phones, and I have what are called palm screens in my world, which is just a fiber mesh phone that's stitched into the palm of your hand. So you can control your own phone just by doing this and just texting and watching stuff on your palm rather than having to hold the phone.
CJR, you could then watch your screen and count to 5 at the same time.
Yeah, but at that point in time, if you're already got that much tech, why not just think the text into being instead of having to actually digitally type it?
I end up having that too.
So it's all about your level of what you can do. So are you going to put aliens in your universe?
In the expanded universe, yes. In the cyberpunk version, in the cyberpunk stories, no. Once it expands out into space, I do think there's going to be other species. It's hard to look at the vastness of this universe. Look up at night. It's hard to envision that there is no other life and intelligent life. There's so much varied, amazing life on this planet alone that it seems inconceivable to me that it doesn't exist elsewhere.
So when you do, have you designed your aliens yet?
Only one, because I've started to write a short story that hopefully I'll have out later this year that does encounter an alien species.
How did you go about that? Did you do it purpose built? Did you just eat way too much popcorn?
So for me, it's all about the nature of evolution. You know, as somebody who worked with wildlife, you see how animals evolve and why they evolve, and how each animal is in its own way perfect for the environment that it has evolved to live in. It's taken millions of years to be this thing. So like I worked with giraffes, for example. I mean, they're awkward looking and they're unbelievably tall, and their pattern doesn't look, and they're adorable. Yeah, I had the pleasure of doing some wild capture and helping to relocate some giraffes into a national park in Africa that they had never existed in, or they hadn't existed in since being driven into extinction there. So it was, you know, giraffes have a special place in my heart. But my point being, they don't necessarily look like something that should exist logically, but if you study them, and every single thing about them is perfect and needs to exist. They have the heart the size of a basketball because they need to pump blood 6 feet up. So they are perfectly evolved for their exact shape and size, and to outcompete other animals for leaves. So when I was designing aliens, I took the exact same approach. Why in the world would this species look this way? Because why would the species look this way based on the planet, their environmental surroundings?
So,
okay,
and
that's go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, you started talking. You were going. I was going to read 34, but I'll let you do it since it's your assigned question, anyways. See, I'm generous like that.
That was very nice of you. It's very nice of you. So, as this interview is clearly winding down, before we wrap this up, was there anything about Into Neon, a Cyberpunk saga that we didn't ask before we move on?
No, I feel like we have a good sense of what the book is. My guess is that listeners are either going to have connected to what I've said so far, or decide that this is not their cup of tea. You know, I feel very proud of this world and this books, and so I hope people out there, you know, if a couple people listening to this end up reading it and enjoying it, that's all I could really hope for. And you know, if they want to reach out to me and tell me that they enjoyed it, then that's just the best thing ever. You know, ultimately, writing is just another form of art, and you just hope that people connect to your art. You know, you're writing it for yourself, but you put it out there for others to enjoy. So if a person says, you know, I read your book and I got transported away for an afternoon, what more could you want in this world, really?
Fair enough. So as we wind this down, can you tell listeners how they can find you?
Yeah, so I've mentioned Thudo Co. as the evil mega corporation. I am Thudo World, THUTOWORLD, on everything. If you want to find me on Instagram, sort of the most personal. I post pictures from my real life. Facebook is if you want basically news and updates from pretty strictly my professional side. Twitter, I just bounce around to Twitter whenever I remember to do it. But I'm anywhere. I'm even on PSN or Xbox or Steam. I'm anywhere you want to find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I haven't done anything with it, but I do have a Thudo World account in most places. So if you want to find me, you can find Thudo World anywhere you want to find me, and tell me, hopefully, how much you loved Into Neon.
All right. And you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters, tack, and tack blades. Anchor.fm/blasters, tack, and tack blades. You can follow us on Twitter at SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. It's almost like the SF stands for sci-fi or something. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. And remember to send all your hate mail to Cisca at blastersandbladespodcast.com. But the main one is... We are. The main one is blastersandbladepodcast@gmail.com. You can follow our shenanigans on Facebook at facebook.com/blastersandbladespodcast. And finally, you can support the show at buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that it's for the podcast. And we promise to keep the co-hosts Nick Garber and Doc Cisca duly intoxicated. They will drink until their liver surrenders. Or if you'd want to make a more regular monthly contribution, you could do so at anchor.fm/blasters, tack, and tack blades for as little as 99 cents a month. Now, bring us home, Doc, before you make fun of me anymore.
You know you love it, or at least they do. So thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For the overworked absentee Nick Garber, J.R. Handley, who's in need of more coffee, I am your over-caffeinated Cisca. This was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week, indulging our love of apparently drinks, nerd culture, cheesy jokes, picking on JR, things that go boom.